Alrighty, boys and girls, it's time for a story. Leafy is here, the man, the myth, and the legend. The poor financial advice guru himself, who convinces 12-year-olds that they know anything about finance, needs absolutely no introduction. You all know who he is, either because you watched his videos back in the day when he was on YouTube, being one of the site's greatest superheroes, and then supervillain, or you watched him when he came back to YouTube and launched a crusade against Pokimane. Alternatively, you could have just seen some lame video essay about him. Back when Leafy was in his prime during 2016, I was just barely starting on YouTube. My videos looked like this. My voice sounded like this.
Superhero movies are probably the highest earning genre of film right now, and it's been that way for the past 15 years.
And I was exposing people with like 300 subscribers. True commentary community excellence. So as you can imagine, I never knew Leafy, and he never knew who I was or anything about me. Well, in 2020, Leafy came back to YouTube and started making videos consistently again. He posted videos about YouTubers, Twitch streamers, annoying people, the stock market, etc. In return, everyone except for the commentary community began talking about him coming back, and how he's a little emo loser who is very unfunny and got owned, the typical stuff you would expect. For those few months, it really started to feel like it was 2016 again, and I was loving every second of it. Seeing a new Leafy video on my homepage definitely resurfaced some nostalgic feelings for that era of YouTube and early high school in general, but just observing the chaos from afar wasn't enough for me. I wanted to be involved. In April of 2020, Leafy created a new Twitter account where he began interacting with the community once again. And at the time I managed to catch his profile, he had just 30,000 followers and was only following a handful of people. I wanted that. I wanted that Twitter follow. I needed my Twitter dick to grow at least a few inches, and I knew I could do it. But he would have no reason to just follow me. I'm not a low follower e-girl who is going to reply to him constantly about how much I want to suck on his toes, and I'm also not someone he knew back in the day when he was on YouTube originally. Or am I? In 2016, one of my favorite YouTubers was Zaptie, a commentator who posted videos that I saw as a step above the rest of the pack. His editing wasn't particularly special, but it definitely worked, and there was a certain charm to his character and branding. Much more important, though, than the aesthetics of his channel, his writing was very good for the time, and there are a few people in the community who matched him in that way. I loved his videos when he was around, and he inspired a lot of what I do. In early 2017, Zaptie was canceled by the community for a number of allegations that came out about him, and 3 years later, he had yet to return. But, in need of a memorable Twitter handle after, well, it's actually kind of hard to talk about, but I decided that using his likeness could be pretty fun. Zaptie had already developed somewhat of a cult following in the time since his sad departure from the site, so there was already some brand recognition there as well. Additionally, I figured my previous public admiration for his work would make it seem much more obvious to newcomers that I wasn't the real guy. That being said, I'd be lying if I said I didn't want people to be fooled at least a little. I definitely was hoping I'd be able to trick at least a few unknowing fools. So I tacked an E onto the end of it, and ever since it's been what I use to watch people scream at each other through text. And despite the fact that I outlined in a video about Zaptie why and how I have been skinwalking him for a year or so, a lot of people who initially see the name simply assume that I am the real guy. This is exactly what happened with Leafy.
Oh, good! It's fucking distracting!
Now, at the point that Leafy followed me, I was pretty sure that he thought I was Zaptie. I know he'd heard of some of my other pals on YouTube and commented on one of their streams, but I didn't think he'd ever heard my name before. Well, we messaged a bit, and after the first few DMs he sent me, he asked if I was the real Zaptie.
Just to be sure, you're same Zaptie from like way back?
This was my chance to either come clean about the fact that I had gotten his attention under false pretenses, or just go along with the joke and see what would happen. Naturally, I took the shitty one and decided to tell him that I am Zaptie. And to make it seem more convincing, I even told him that I remembered a collaboration video we had done back in 2016, which did in fact happen.
And even one of them in particular, Zaptie, was actually cool with explaining the slander as well for the video.
Hey everybody, I'm Ed, or Zaptie, and I actually attended law school for 2 years. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I know enough about law to know the basics of slander. While Keem certainly hasn't been afraid to throw this word around at claims made about him, he doesn't seem to understand how to refrain from doing it himself.
This made the likelihood that I was him much more convincing. Because I drew up this vague memory in Leafy's mind of a collab he had done with Zaptie, it seemed like I was the real guy. And as long as he didn't end up clicking on any of the links on my account, which I was relatively confident wouldn't happen, I would be left completely unhindered for a good amount of time. At one point, we even talked about how Zaptie had left YouTube, at which point I was nervous that he would discover who I was if he looked into it at all.
Just making sure someone didn't hijack your account or something. Remember hearing some shit that happened with you, so yeah, don't bother explaining. You could have killed multiple people at a gas station and I wouldn't care.
I mean, one Google search and it would completely reveal who I was. And I tried to play it cool, but secretly I was kind of shitting myself. But he didn't, and simply assumed that I was telling the truth. In his mind, this seemed to work as he took my word for it, and while he'd seemingly heard something about Zaptie's departure, he'd never actually questioned what happened or seemed to care enough to look into it. I remember even telling multiple people about this at the time, to which most of them responded in either disbelief that he still thought I was Zap, or just asked me if Leafy was severely mentally handicapped. Both are pretty valid if you ask me. I had already tweeted out that he had followed me, which inevitably inundated my inbox with a bunch of little leeches trying to get me to get him to follow them. But I had greater plans in mind than simply tricking him into thinking that I was Zaptie. Inevitably, he was going to realize it, either from someone else telling him or wandering onto my Twitter to click the channel link. Especially given the fact that we were talking on a kind of consistent basis. At some point, it was bound to happen. I figured that I wanted to be in control of it happening though, at the very least, rather than my cover being blown by some unfortunate circumstances. So, I began crafting a plan. Leafy began his time on YouTube as a Minecraft channel, and at the time he was returning, the game was, and still is, receiving a pretty big resurgence in popularity. I myself had been playing the game somewhat consistently with some friends. I decided that I would invite Leafy to play Minecraft with me casually, and simultaneously start up a live stream on my channel. I would also try to start up a conversation specifically with him about Zaptie and how he had left YouTube, staying in character the entire time. As Leafy and I played, the audience would eventually realize who I was playing with and start telling him on Twitter that he wasn't actually playing with Zaptie, but instead a man who had ripped off his face and was wearing his skin like a bloody mask. I figured that he didn't know Zaptie that well, and he also hadn't heard his voice in a while, so I could make a pretty convincing impression of him. I even had people in my comment section thinking that I was him, and thinking that my voice and inflection sounded like him, so I knew I had a pretty good shot. Leafy had added me on Discord, and we were about to play, within literal minutes. Unfortunately, right as the master plan was about to be executed, the unthinkable happened. Leafy finally happened to click on the link in my Twitter, likely after realizing that he didn't really know much about the guy he was about to play games with. Sure enough, he saw the video about Zaptie where I explained some of the lore behind the Twitter account. It's because, well, I am Zaptie. Okay, not literally, but after being suspended on Twitter enough times, I realized I would have to go incognito mode and use some other name, and I decided to utilize Ed's namesake for this purpose. You can actually see him reacting to it in real time in the DMs, and so unfortunately for me, the plan was completely ruined. This also meant that I probably wouldn't be able to fool anyone else with my Twitter as word would get around. A few more people did think I was Zaptie after this, and to this day, once in a while, I'll get someone thinking that I am him, or that we're the same person, or that somehow he evolved into me after he left, but that's just not the case. And I am probably ruining any chance I would have of doing that by making this video, but it's a story that's too good not to tell. Leafy later went on to talk about this on stream as well, and was trying to tell the story about how I was an absolute psycho. Unfortunately, I don't have any archives of his streams, and I have no way to download them.
I ain't here for the money, I ain't here for the fame. Though it might be nice to own a jet plane.
In August of 2020, his YouTube and Twitch accounts were both deleted by website staff, citing rules against harassment. And while some people would be outspoken against his termination, others in the Twitch community encouraged his deletion and said that it was a good thing for the platform. They've since gone on to talk about why censorship is bad and how Twitch is becoming increasingly more sanitized. Kind of funny, but that's a story for another day, meaning another video that I made. The little slice of 2016 coming back was now gone, and I doubt there's any chance that it will come back in the same way that it did. And, in an interesting turn of events, recently Zaptie came back to YouTube for an interview about his own cancellation, or whatever you want to call it, giving me a personal sense of closure with a situation that I think we rarely get online, as well as an opportunity to hear from someone who had inspired my channel and then disappeared for so long without a trace.
So I was fine. So I was like, all right, well, I guess this is just my job for now. That's fine. I was Twitch streaming a bit, so that would provide a little bit of supplemental income. Like, I was doing all right. And then, 2 months later, there it goes. And I was like, all right, well, gotta go back for my job back.
He even said elsewhere that he would try to give me the original Zaptie handle at some point, which I definitely hope he pulls through with because I will absolutely use it. And so now, we're right back to where we started. I guess if there's one lesson to be learned from this situation as a whole, one conclusion to this little saga, which I think is actually a pretty important lesson, one that I can pass on to you guys from my experience on YouTube over the past 4 years, it would be to follow at Zaptie on Twitter. Thanks for watching. I've been Turkey Tom, And until next time,
Leave me alone.